move now to item number 5.
Item number 5 is an ordinance authorizing A, the removal and storage of the Confederate Soldier Monument and 2 cannons located in Travis Park. B is the city to enter into contracts for the removal, transportation, and storage of the Confederate Soldier Monument and 2 cannons in an amount not to exceed $150,000. C is for the city to enter into a donation agreement with a nonprofit involved in historic preservation or education for the acceptance of the Confederate Soldier Monument and 2 cannons. And D is a modification to Chapter 35-640 and 35-803 of the Unified Development Code to allow for the above noted.
Lori, you have a presentation for us?
Yes. Good morning. This item authorizes several actions that are necessary for the removal, relocation, storage, and ultimate donation of the monument located in Travis Park. Travis Park is one of San Antonio's oldest parks. It was donated to the city by the Samuel Maverick family in 1870. He required that the donation and the land be used as a city park, and it was donated upon his death. There have been several improvements to Travis Park that occurred between that time frame over the 20 years between 1870 and 1890, but it wasn't really until the early 1890s with the City Beautiful movement that the city started focusing on the redesign of this urban park. And it really took the effort of several philanthropists to make this park to what it is today. In 1892, the 2 cannons that are in the park today were donated. These cannons are reportedly used at the Civil War battle at Valverde, New Mexico, and they were donated to the park by Major Teal, and they've been there since. The Bernard E. B. chapter of the Daughters of Confederacy began fundraising for a monument for the Confederacy in the mid-1890s. They raised $3,000, and the cornerstone for that monument was laid in June of 1899, and the monument was finally done in early 1900. The monument was designed by Virginia Montgomery from New Orleans, and it was constructed by Frank Teak, who is a German-born sculptor who also managed a monument company and a granite company in Llano, Texas. Over the past several years, the city of San Antonio has really focused on revitalizing Travis Park. It was done through physical improvements as well as programming improvements with our partners to include the San Antonio Parks Foundation, Centro, and the San Anthony Hotel. 5 years later, today, Travis Park is a place where the community comes to gather. We have daily events with a food truck program. We have weekly events with our Fitness in the Park program. We have monthly specialty events and annual specialty events. In 2 weeks, we'll have the Jazz Alive event. We just concluded our Movies by Moonlight Summer Series, and in fact, on July 25th, we had over 3,500 San Antonians come to Travis Park to watch The Little Mermaid. So people come to Travis Park because they feel safe and they feel welcome, and we've done a great job of making sure it is a great community gathering place. In fact, it's won numerous awards over the past several years, and it continues to be voted as San Antonio's favorite park. Now, in light of the recent national debate over public memorials honoring Confederate figures, and also the recent events in Charlottesville, Virginia, this debate has been elevated. But San Antonio continues to desire this park be a community gathering space. And we want people to feel safe, and we want them to feel welcome when they come to experience the programming that we place in this park. Therefore, staff is recommending the removal, the relocation, the storage, and the ultimate donation of the Confederate monument in Travis Park and the 2 cannons. Today's actions, we are requesting City Council to authorize the removal and relocation of the Confederate monument and the 2 cannons. We're also asking Council to consider a modification to the process that is outlined in Chapter 35 of the Unified Development Code. Now, there is not a process in the Unified Development Code that outlines how monuments in public spaces should be removed, but this chapter references how changes in public parks should occur, and it delegates the review of those changes to the Historic and Design Review Commission. Now, the Historic and Design Review Commission, they are an advisory body to the city manager, unlike other commissions like the Planning and Zoning Commission. Therefore, the decisions made at the HDRC typically do not go to City Council. However, staff is recommending that this item be brought forward to City Council because it is a policy item for council consideration. It is not a design change to a park. We are requesting the removal of the monument and its relocation. Now, when there are design changes to the park, that will go through a public process and there will be community input. But today's action, we're asking council to consider the removal and the relocation of the park. Now, this also authorizes city staff to negotiate and execute a donation agreement with a nonprofit involved in the historic preservation. A nonprofit has not been identified. That will be identified after the community has provided input, after city departments have provided input, and that is also included in the ordinance for today's action. The item also authorizes up to $150,000 for the removal, transportation, and logistical support of the monument's removal, as well as authorizes the city manager to execute a professional services contract for the removal and relocation of the monument. I want to stress that the monument will be stored in a facility where it can be secured, and also the removal will be handled by a contractor who has experience in installing and deinstalling public art and monuments. That concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Lori. And we have several people signed up to speak. I ask for your patience in listening to everyone's name being called. If you can hold conversation and applause down to a minimum so that people can hear their name being called. I will call up the person who is next to speak, in addition to the person in line behind them. And as I stated yesterday, we had a long hearing yesterday. I'm going to call the names who weren't able to speak yesterday, who weren't signed up to speak, so we get through those first, and then those folks who spoke last night will get to speak again after those folks. So we'll begin with Daniel B.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Simmons B. I reside in the Good Councilman Trevino's District 1. So much to say, but I'll limit it to two things. First off, I've observed what's been going on with regard to the American War Veterans Memorial that sits in Travis Park. And it made me think of Robert Ruark's novel, Something of Value. The name was derived from an African proverb that went such: before you throw out your old ways and traditions, be sure you have something of value with which to replace them. And councilmen, council ladies, you have nothing of value that can replace this monument. And I ask you, should you decide to further desecrate this monument, please drop the name Military City, USA, because you are not Military City, USA. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. B. Mario Salas. Councilman Salas.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. If I could, I would like to recognize the Chairman of the Community of Churches for Social Action Group, their President, Pastor Jerry Daly. Would you please stand? And New Christian Creation Fellowship representatives couldn't be here, but Pastor Claudette and Bishop Copeland wanted everyone to know that they stand for the removal of this statue. I have on the easel petition campaign that took place, and I do want to turn this over to the city clerk, Leticia, if you don't mind. We have 19,000 signatures as of yesterday, But when I went home last night, there's now 20,000 plus signatures and about 1,000 more I didn't collect, but about 1,000 more of personally signed signatures from all of the city council districts. So right now, and it's not accurate from my point of view, but it's close to 21,000 signatures to remove this statue. They say the Civil War is not about slavery, but about northern aggression. In fact, simple reading of the Texas Articles of Succession reveals it was simply that, about slavery and the extension of white supremacy. The statue in Travis Park honors heroes. Well, in fact, it is in the guise of hero worship. There was actually an extension of white supremacy and the Southern cult called the Redeemer Movement of the Lost Cause that sought to reinvent history and step away from the real reasons for the Civil War. The statue was erected to glorify those who fought to defend slavery. They say all whites of the South supported secession and slavery. Well, in fact, many whites deserted the Confederate Army and actually led wars and fights against Robert E. Lee and his forces. They say the U.S. Congress received reconciled the country after the Civil War. Well, in fact, most of those congressmen were segregationists themselves and were interested in supporting a form of segregation in Jim Crow, which was to take place soon after that. They say most of the whites did not own slaves. Well, that part's true, but those were the ones who had to fight and die for the Confederacy, because the ones who owned slaves under the 20 Negro rule were exempted from the Confederate draft. All of Texans were united in secession. Well, in fact, slaves, Mexican Americans, and Germans opposed slavery. German Americans in the German Hill Country helped slaves, runaway slaves, and carried out wars against the Confederacy. As a matter of fact, German Americans walked through the streets of San Antonio singing John Brown's song of the hymn of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and their words were, "We will hang Jeff Davis from a sour apple tree." So we do want to recognize also Pastor Price and my pastor from Mount Zion First Baptist Church, Brother Otis Mitchell, and we are here to support the removal of that racist statue from the city of San Antonio. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Salas. Fidel Castillo. Fidel Castillo. Jack M. Finger.
Well, Mayor Nirenberg and other members of the illustrious San Antonio City Council, for the record, my name is Jack M. Finger. You know, a couple hours ago, some of y'all were discussing the illegal alien issue, and a couple of y'all even talked a good game about it. But in the end, you just went right on with the flow. What hypocrisy. Well, let's see if we can get some more hypocrisy going over here. Yes, my golly, the big issue with the statue. Yes, well, by golly, we've seen all the arguments pro and con about it, but last Thursday, Mr. Mayor, the San Antonio City Council meeting agenda showed this. So to those of us who are interested in it, a full 7 days before the meeting, it just simply showed this. If you would, Mr. Audiovisual, just put that right on there, just generally speaking, just a general appearance there. Yeah, it just simply says consent agenda, mundane items right there. Then suddenly, we all thought this was going to be the beginning. Suddenly, on Monday morning, it just suddenly changed to this appearance. There it simply says, whoops, it says individual items, something about a statue being thrown out of the park there. My goodness, yeah, and then a lot of us were caught by surprise. So what the heck is going on? Sounds like a big switcheroo here. Yeah. Now, Mr. Audiovisual Man, put that on there. The Express News had an article about it. It shows that the mayor fast-tracked statue decision. Yeah. Yes, and what does it say? Blow up that blue inked area there, if you would, there. Mayor Ron Nirenberg, early Monday, early Monday, sent a memo explaining his decision to bypass, underline bypass, the normal procedures for issues brought forth under a council consideration request. Now, Mr. Audiovisual Man, let's see, go to blue underlined areas there. Yeah. Various councilpersons didn't like that. It says the process did, quote, the process did not occur, nor did the CCR include the cannons. It was ignored. Yeah. Further on down there, the mayor is going down a slippery slope when he chooses to change the rules to govern. We need the process to keep City Hall transparent and equitable, Mr. Brockhouse said. Thank you, Mr. Audiovisual Man. Now, yes, Mr. Mayor, my God, looks like what you're doing here is what we call the big switcheroo. Yes. What transparency, Mr. Mayor. My God, a full 3 days before it happens, and this is what you do to us.
Thank you, Mr. Finger. Renee Hernandez. Are you Mr. Hernandez? And you're giving your time to who? The next person signed up to speak is Eagle Mendoza. Okay. Mr. Mendoza? You'll have 6 minutes.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, City Councilmen. Good morning, San Antonio. Good morning, Texas and USA. And God we trust. My name, Igor Mendoza. I'm professional activist, civil rights songwriter. I make songs, for Cesar Chavez. I make songs for Patrick Flores and the Spurs, #1 song in the world. And my new song, named Texas, We Stand Along. And 1 week is ready. And the profit is for the hurricane people. And my inside, I feel everything, what happens bad. But in God we trust. In God we trust. And you, Mayor, Principal, and the City Councils, the best too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. Diana Lopez. Ms. Lopez will be followed by Jedediah Valdez.
Good morning, good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for earlier, Councilman Ray Saldana, and the work that has been done around immigration and supporting families is really important. And it's actually very connected to the structure of how the city and how the Texas views around racism and how embedded oppression is within this city and the state. So I work for an organization called Southwest Workers Union. We're a workers union, but we also support community efforts to really dismantle oppressive systems. And what we see here is the dismantling and the change that's happening, and it's uncomfortable, it's hard, but everybody is doing the right job taking down these spaces that have always been used to intimidate our communities, the Mexican communities, the Black communities, those that are seen as inferior based on the color of their skin or their class. And so we're here and we're in support of removing that statue and not only the statue at Travis Park, but all statues that intimidate and are forced upon our communities. And this is really connected to a larger struggle, and we see that through the two biggest things that San Antonio and Texas are facing is around immigration and climate change. And the basis of those two are around white supremacy and the idea that resources and people can be used. And in this case, immigrants, low-class communities are used as resources and are abused and are used and are taken for granted. And so we're here. I act today as a babysitter for my sister who's a teacher. And so in support, and we'll be here fighting not only today, but for the rest of our lives to make sure that our future generations and our communities are strong and are well supported and reflect themselves in public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Jedediah Valdez. Mr. Valdez will be followed by Oliver Hill.
Hello. Thank you for taking your time to come out and voice your opinions for the statue. I ask that the City Council vote to remove, preserve, and relocate the statue to the Confederate Cemetery. Hate and bigotry should not exist in this city. There is a word that me and my friends use. We belong to the rave community. It's called plur. Plur means peace, love, unity, and respect. And I expect that this city to unite together to remove this statue.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. Oliver Hill. Mr. Hill will be followed by Nita Shaver.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Oliver Hill, and I'm president of the San Antonio branch NAACP. And our organization unanimously authorized my coming before this council to ask that you take action to remove the Confederate statue in Travis Park and other Confederate monuments and symbols in public places and spaces in San Antonio. San Antonio is at a crossroad. Remove the symbols of bigotry and racism, or allow the city to move forward with diversity and inclusion for all citizens. The Confederate statue and symbols will foster racism and bigotry in this city and will continue to create division among all of us. There are many who espouse the removal of these symbols and statues would erase Confederate history and heritage. But history will tell you the Confederate States, including Texas, seceded from the United States of America, instigating the Civil War, due in large part to the continued support of legalized slavery. These statues and symbols were erected after the Civil War to intimidate and suppress newly freed slaves, and they stand today to continue to try and intimidate people of color. We cannot and should not revere this dark period of the time in this country that allowed slavery of a people to occur for the benefit of others. My ancestors did not come to this country as willing workers. None of you on this dais has experienced the life that I've had to live in my many years in this city to be required to pass the statue in Travis Park in my childhood, to experience Jim Crow during the days of adulthood, and in 2017, continued to feel the remnants of hatred and bigotry. We must remember the Confederacy lost the war. If they had not, I would not have this privilege to stand before you today. As you prepare for the tricentennial celebration in 2018, and our branch will prepare for its 100th year celebration in its fight to eradicate racism and bigotry, I'm asking the council to take the necessary steps to remove these monuments and symbols from public places and spaces and place them in a museum where history can be adequately chronicled with the truth. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Nita Shaver. Nita Shaver is followed by Elizabeth Sutherland.
We cannot erase our history. However, we can determine how we commemorate and honor it. Our history won't change by removing this statue. Many people's attitude will not change, but perhaps there will be a shift, a slow shift in how we teach history, how we learn from history, how we perceive history. I have a great appreciation for our American history, as I'm sure all of you do. On my mother's side, my first ancestor came to Virginia in 1650. On my father's side, at the turn of the last century, my grandparents came through Ellis Island. I think those, perhaps, many of those who oppose the removal of this statue have really led to the removal of this statue because of what so many of them bring to it. The attitudes, how they treat others, the symbols they carry. The gentleman who spoke before me really said it all so very eloquently. And he's right. He's right. We must come together. We need to consider our fellow man. Everyone, we need to consider everyone's feelings because they're true. They're true. In a way, I think, you know, I've toured plantations and they're beautiful, but then you walk through and you remember the history that took place there. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking, you know, people can go and they can tour places on the coast of Africa where Africans were forced to board ships, often put there by their fellow Africans. In Germany, people can walk through the concentration camps. And you go there to remember. You don't go to celebrate something. Same thing on the coast of Africa. And I think until our plantations educate people, because in a sense, I think those in some sordid way were concentration camps of their own.
Thank you, Ms. Shaver.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Sutherland. Elizabeth Sutherland. Ms. Sutherland will be followed by Gavin Rogers.
First and foremost, I believe this statue is a memorial for the American citizens who died during a very bloody Civil War. The Travis Park Monument is one of the state's oldest. The statue is actually the first public monument ever erected in San Antonio. This is our history. Many people don't realize this, but unlike the majority of Union soldiers, there are thousands of Confederate dead in mass unmarked graves across the country. My aunt went to Tennessee for the eclipse, and she was shocked when she saw the cemetery by one of the battlefields there. Individual graves for the Union and a mass grave out of sight for the rest. She had to look for it. These are our ancestors. I'm not saying they were right, but this is our history, and you cannot remove it. I have family that fought on both sides, brother against brother, just because of what state they lived in. In pre-Civil War America, most citizens' first loyalty went to their state and the local community in which they lived. Referring to the United States of America in the singular is a purely post-Civil War phenomenon. The statue in Travis Park says, "Lest we forget our Confederate dead." It does not intimidate or hate. It is a memorial. Is that what we're trying to do? Forget and board up a very influential part of our nation's history. Instead of tearing down monuments, we should be trying to find more ways to add more information and more context to our country's history. All of it, not remove it from the pages. Now, I can understand why many Southerners don't like the implication that Southernness and Confederate heritage are one and the same, because they are not. But there are people, extremists really, who want to remove or totally destroy traces of our nation's history. They want folks to spit on the graves of their ancestors, and this is how it starts. You must keep in mind, we are not just remembering American lives. Not only Native Americans served, but so did African Americans, Hispanics, Chinese as well. The incomplete and destroyed records give an inaccurate number of the people that served in the Confederate and Union armies. The best estimate is around 620,000 souls. I'm not a person who thinks Confederate memorials should be boarded up. These things must not be removed from our history or from our parks. You are disgracing the lives of hundreds of thousands with one action, and if you do this, you can break this flood wall, and it will not stop there. Years after the Civil War, on April 21st, 1898, 1 year before the statue was erected, the United States declared war against Spain. Many former Confederate soldiers joined the military to aid. Confederate soldiers not only gave their lives during the Civil War time, which is what they felt was right at the time, even if it's not. We cannot change the past, but many gave their lives soon after to defend their country. President McKinley, during this time period, even acknowledged this. The U.S. emerged an influential world power, started on a path that would affect its role in international affairs for the future, and today, I am 100% against the attempt to store or board up this piece of our history, all of our history. Entering into a donation agreement with an organization to store it away is an attempt to hide the fact that you are giving into bullying extremists, people who want to give poor and overused excuses, trying to remove an important part of our nation's history. Please look more into your nation's history before you try to remove it.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland. Gavin Rogers.
Good afternoon. Like all of us here, we love our city and take great pride in our diversity. I want to thank Councilman Shaw and Trevino for taking up this issue and for Mayor Nierenberg for expediting the removal. There are many reasons to avoid the removal of the Confederate monument in Travis Park. But despite the threats of hate groups and twisted political agendas, you have stayed true and moved forward while also inviting dialogue from all points of view. As Jonathan David Jones wrote, there is nothing weak and indecisive about working with the community on this issue. It has created space for Black voices to be elevated and heard. These monuments are not harmless markers of our history, our heritage. They are often built to celebrate the tradition of white supremacy and power over people of color. Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy, declared the Confederacy to be founded upon the great truth that Black people are not equal to the white man, that slavery is the natural and normal condition. We need to remove this monument, but relocate it to a more appropriate place. Our park should be a place where all people feel welcome and free. The monument honors Confederate soldiers who died. It was a tragic time in our history. I don't know the hearts of each soldier. To be fair, many of my ancestors probably fought for the South. If I was born in a different time, that could be me on that monument. Standing in the soldier's shoes disturbs me to reflect on my own sins and actions. 100 years from now, people are going to look back on us in this room and be appalled by the social injustices we are blinded by and currently ignore. That's the bad part about being blinded. We don't even know what injustices are clearly in front of us. So I hope our descendants show us grace when they reflect on our generation. Right now, our world suffers global recession, massive inequality, hunger, deforestation, pollution, and the list goes on. I'm afraid to say we might have not made much progress since the Civil War. According to the Global Slavery Index and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, there are an estimated 25 to 46 million people trapped in slavery. Despite many countries banning slavery in the past 150 years, there are more slaves today than any point in human history. That's you and me on that statue, and it needs to be moved. We need to be moved. But we cannot throw stones at people because they sin differently than us. That statue needs to be moved, and we need dialogue on where to put it. We need to teach our children the right way to take action. How to remove that statue and handle the dialogue almost says more about us than the issue at hand. My faith reminds me to love my enemy, to love my neighbor even when we disagree. I often fail at that. You can ask my family. So what are we teaching our children? The well-known letter to the Corinthians reminds me that love never gives up. Love cares more for others than self. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others. It doesn't keep the score of sins of others, doesn't reveal when others grovel. Let's remove this statue and have a civil dialogue on where to place the monument. Let's teach our children the right way to protest, teach history, and stand up against the injustices of the past and present. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Rogers. Pastor Jerry Daly.
Good afternoon, Council Mayor. Good afternoon, Council persons. I'm Pastor Jerry Daly of Macedonia Baptist Church, but also Chairman of the Community of Churches for Social Action. The past month, even longer, we've all been fastened with our eyes with what has taken place in our country. We've seen devastation in Charlottesville, Virginia, devastation caused by people. And we've seen devastation in Houston and surrounding areas caused by nature. And we get the opportunity today to determine which type of America we will live in. I saw two symbols. I saw a symbol in Virginia of individuals with lit torches, with Ku Klux Klan, with Nazis, with white supremacists, demanding that they would maintain a symbol that did not represent everybody. I saw and heard of a young lady who lost her life because she took a stand. Then I saw just a few days ago another symbol, a symbol of blacks and whites, Hispanics, out of a concern and a love for one another, who reached down, regardless of political persuasion, regardless of anything else. They saw a brother down, they saw a sister down, and they said, we can help one another. You're my brother, you're my sister, you're not heavy. And it's because of that kind of America, you get the opportunity to choose what kind of America you want to be a part of. San Antonio is a diverse community, and that community represents all of us today. I've heard individuals talk about history. Well, I had cancer some years ago. That's a part of my history. But because it was a part of my history does not mean I wanted it to stay there. I removed that part of my history so I could move on and go on. I commend the staff for recommending that this statue be removed, relocated, because anyone who goes anywhere in our town needs to feel that they are a part of something that is inclusive. I thank you for the opportunity. I would strongly ask that it would not be a vote of 4 to 5, but that every last one of you would take a unanimous stand and say that we cannot continue this, no mas, no more. Because any vote that does not represent all of us is a stain on our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Daly. Jonathan David Jones. Mr. Jones will be followed by Farrell Clark.
I just want to start actually by thanking the city of San Antonio for the relief efforts in Houston. At this very moment, my neighborhood happens to be underwater. I'm from Houston. My family's dealing with that, so I appreciate those efforts. So on this particular topic, at Travis Park, when we hosted a rally, I stood face to face with a man that had a Confederate flag on his shoulder and a rifle on his other shoulder and told me to get behind the wall, nigger. So at this point, I'm kind of beyond arguing semantics on what the Confederacy stood for. So my message today is actually for you, Council. So whenever there is change on the horizon, there are those that stride boldly towards that horizon, and then there are those who oppose it. How you respond will determine what chapter you will be in the history books. I am here because I believe that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. I am here because I believe that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I believe that the opposite of poverty is justice. I am here because I believe that the America of today we have inherited, but the America of tomorrow is ours. I am here because I have a son on the way. His name is Jonah. And I believe that the world that we create today is the world that he will have to live in. I'm here because you have the opportunity to play a direct hand in what his generation will look like. I'm here to encourage you to strive boldly towards that horizon, because when I often say that obligation will threaten that if I don't act, I will be in trouble, and if responsibility will say that if I don't act, that they will be in trouble, and that we have to ask ourselves not what are our obligations, but what is our responsibilities. I say that because history will not remember what was popular. History will not remember who was paying you. History will not remember who wanted you to do this or that. History will remember the decision that you made. It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Farrell Clark. Mr. Clark will be followed by Chance Hilbrand.
All right, thank you, City Council. I want to give a special thanks first off to the mayor for fast-tracking this item, and also to Mr. Shaw and Mr. Trevino for putting the item on the agenda. What I have to say today is simply this. Vote with me. Let's make a change in America. Let's stand together and unite all people regardless of sex, race, creed, religion, or orientation or beliefs. Vote with me in letting go of hatred, fear, bigotry, and injustice. Vote with me now for us, for our country, but most importantly for our children, who do not deserve to live in a world that is dominated by fear and by hate. And to this goal, we the people stand united. And we ask that you vote to remove this statue that's in Travis Park. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Chance Hilbrand. Mr. Hilbrand will be followed by Rhett Smith.
Yes, sir. I'm standing here to ask that y'all remove the statue in Travis Park. A lot of people feel that it doesn't represent racism and that it doesn't have any ties towards racism, but six of the founders of the KKK were ex-Confederate soldiers. And so it has direct ties into white supremacy and why they're standing behind this so hard, because they feel like it's stepping on their privileges, and they feel like it even being removed to a museum, where I don't see the problem in a museum, because you're able to get history behind it and it doesn't take anything away from it. But they feel that it's a problem even being moved to a museum. But I think a museum is the correct place for it. They don't want to be erecting statues of Hitler. I mean, he did a lot of stuff for Germany and turning their economy around and a lot of different things, but he also did a lot of bad things. And so just because you did good things before, some of the bad things that you do, you have to answer for, and you can't just look past that. So I'm just saying, can y'all put it in y'all's hearts to think about and do the right thing in removing this, because we don't need division in San Antonio. It's a very diverse place, and I would like for it to stay like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilbrand. Rhett Smith. Rhett Smith. Antonio Diaz. Mr. Diaz will be followed by Rusty Mahan.
Nilsi and Kualito Nali means hello and have a good day. I'm here in support of removing the statue of the Confederate soldier at Travis Park, because it is to do with white supremacy. It's to do with white privilege. That is the history of this nation and of this state. If you take time to read the Constitution of Texas independence, it is embedded in there that slavery should be maintained by the state. So it's time for this generation. Again, I keep saying, we need to write our narrative, and I believe we're in that process of writing our own narrative in our own time. Those people did it in their time because of their beliefs, and those that were empowered to do so. Now it's our time. And equality has its time. It's time to change inequality into equality, and everyone to have a voice, which we didn't have at those times. When that statue was erected, that monument was erected, we didn't have that. You had Jim Crow affected all non-whites, which included indigenous people, brown Mexican people, Spanish-speaking people, along with blacks from Africa. Chinese, any non-white was not allowed in white establishments, did not have the privilege of education as whites. It's changing, and it needs to continue changing. So with your vote today, hopefully we can continue to change for the good, for inclusiveness, for equality. That is what we strive for. I'm also going to speak about removing another symbol of white privilege, and that's the statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Park. Rename that park, remove that statue, also place it somewhere where it can be viewed and studied for historical purposes, but it should not be in a public place because Columbus brought genocide to this continent. Columbus is the one that brought slavery to this continent, crossed it across the Atlantic to our continent. And that is, he is the original slaver, trader. He's the one that brought it to our shores. And so I'm here to ask you, as I've been asking for years now, to remove that statue, rename that park. Actually put someone there. I have nothing against Italian people. You want to put another statue of another Italian person? Do so, of Marconi, of someone else that has given us also enlightenment, but not slavery and not genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Rusty Mahan.
Hi there. Back again. This is becoming a habit. So I agree with my friend here on some issues. This city was basically founded on slavery. You will be working until the end, and there's nothing left if you intend to purge this city of slavery. From the building we're in, to the pictures on the wall, to the people who came over here and the Spanish who came over here and took the indigenous people and shipped them to Europe and in exchange brought over black slaves. This thing is huge. This Confederate monument is only the next thing, and then there will be a next thing and a next thing. We've got to face the fact that we live in a very war-filled world and figure out what we're going to do positively for tomorrow, not fight the battle from Jim Crow laws or segregation. We are past that. This is San Antonio. We are past that. On March 27, 1899, the City Council and the city granted permission for the United Daughters of the Confederacy to erect a monument. They said that monument could be placed there for perpetually. That was a contract, that was an agreement, that was trust. It's understood that many of you, several of you, are kind of leaning towards moving the monument. Some of us, I'm not speaking for all of the people on the keeping it, but I do speak for some, and I speak for many of my new friends here. By the way, I've made a lot of new friends thanks to this. I'm having lunch with several of them today. The deal is that many of us believe that the monument would be very, very well fitted in a military park. This is Military City. Let's take all of our military monuments, just put them in a nice location, get them out of some of the places where they've been shoved into corners. Let's build a monument to the Buffalo Soldiers. Many of those men came from San Antonio. There's no monument for them. Put it in context. Let's do a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we can fight the battle over slavery, whether this war was slavery, not slavery. 26,000 Texans died fighting in that war. That monument clearly represents Confederate dead. It is not a monument to white supremacy, but it represents certain things to certain people. I hear that. I want to make tomorrow a better day. So how can we do that? I think we accept our warts, possibly move the monument to a military park, but please do. Y'all had pretty well assured us that you would form some focus groups and that we would find an appropriate place for the monument and we'd be a part of the process. We're on the same team, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahan. Mike Lowe.
To the council members, I want to be very clear that Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter here, Mr. Brockhouse. That's not a threat. Mr. Perry, that is a fact. That this country has not valued black life, and I will tell you how. Mr. Brockhouse, you mentioned about being, you don't need to be reminded of who's been around, how long. I've been a black man for 37 years in this country. I've served 15 years in the United States Army as a freedom fighter for everyone to exercise whatever opinion, whatever right they have. But I know what it's like to be marginalized. I know what it's like to be disenfranchised, and I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. And for that, let's clarify something. White supremacy is why we are here today. The violent action of white supremacy is what brought us to this conversation. White supremacy is this. It is a belief that white people are superior to those of all other races, especially the black race, and should therefore dominate, white supremacy should dominate society. We hold these truths to be self-evident, Mr. Trevino, that all men were created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, Mr. Trevino, 41 of the 56 signers were slave owners. We hold these truths to be undeniable truths that the government of various states and the Confederate itself was established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, that the African race had no agency in their establishment, that they were rightfully held and regarded as inferior and a dependent race, and in the condition only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial and tolerable. That in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights, that servitude of the African race existing in these states are mutually beneficial to both bond and free, and it is abundantly authorized by the experience of mankind and revealed by the Almighty Creator. With that said, the 13th Amendment was established to abolish slavery, but made it legal that slavery be in existence for crime. Slavery hasn't been abolished. The mass incarceration is the new form of slavery. Oppression is what we're talking about. White supremacy is why we're here. That monument is a reminder that it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose, Mr. Brockhouse, but our chains.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. That's all the citizens who have signed up to speak. We'll now move to council member comments, starting with Councilman Trevino.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to start by thanking my council colleague, Councilman Shaw, for co-authoring the CCR that brought us to this point. It's a real honor to work with you, and I'm very, very proud of our partnership on this. I also want to thank our mayor for accelerating this process, for finding the courage to bring this to council so that we can discuss this and we can vote on this immediately. I want to thank the city manager and her strong staff for all their work. It is by which we're moving forward, and I really, really appreciate Lori Houston's presentation and all the great folks that are helping us tackle this important issue. Andy Segovia, thank you again for your legal expertise and your consultation on these matters. This is an important matter, no doubt. Decisions like the one before us today are worthy of consideration because they deal with basic human rights issues: dignity, respect, compassion, and the right to exist and reciprocate those virtues with other members of society. As President Abraham Lincoln eloquently stated in the Gettysburg Address, our nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Equality means our citizens should not feel disenfranchised in and by their own public spaces based on relics from a bygone time. Our actions today affirm the liberty and equality generations of Americans have fought and died for since our founding. We must seize opportunities to grow inclusivity and knowledge within our respective communities. We must seek out symbols of institutionalized racism, remove them from our public spaces, and work as a community to build a more welcoming public space and create more thoughtful policies. Thus, becoming a fully inclusive city will not occur overnight, nor with the relocation of the statue. It will only happen over time, with discussion, education, and compassion. Society is collectively shifting its focus towards ensuring all groups are treated equally. From crosswalks to translation services to the front steps of City Hall, people are now looking at the commonplace and everyday through a new, shared perspective and building a more compassionate community. We are a diverse community, and decisions such as these should respect our unique existence and place in America. We cannot call anything progress which does not help grow dignity and inclusivity in our community. In Military City, USA, we have and will continue to honor and value our military history, as messy as it may be. For those whom this monument is an important remembrance, it is no honor for people to be unaware of what this memorial is because of a lack of context. By relocating it to a place and a space where those who can view it fully understand what it commemorates, who commissioned it, and the time in which it was commissioned, to honor Texans who gave the last full measure of devotion and educate all those who view it in proper historical and educational context. Future generations of San Antonians will not feel the burden of oppressive icons from a previous era in their public spaces and be free to live in a community that celebrates its diverse population. With that, I move to approve item number 5, authorizing the removal and storage of the Confederate Soldier Monument and 2 cannons located in Travis Park, and a donation agreement with a nonprofit involved in historic or educational purposes.
All right, there is a motion and a second for item number 5. We have additional council comment. Thank you, Councilman Trevino. We'll go now to Councilman Pelaez.
Thank you, Mayor. Yesterday, my staff and I worked together to develop and draft prepared comments. And we worked on these comments so that I could make sure to gingerly traverse this minefield of controversy. But I can't, in good faith, stick to our script. And sorry to my staff. It was a script that we wrote in which I was supposed to say that we won't be erasing history. I was supposed to tell you that history is something we live every day. I was supposed to tell you that we will continue to remember, that this monument is a symbol of the past that is hurtful and does violence to the values that we espouse, values of respect and dignity and inclusiveness and love and liberty for all human beings. Then I was supposed to drop a few lines about moving forward and hand in hand towards a tomorrow where we're all going to agree. But I can't because it's, this is too important for platitudes. And so I've been taking notes while I've been listening to you, and a few observations. there's nobody that can deny that the Civil War was horrible and that we, as a nation, suffered a lot, and that brothers fought against brothers, that our country was torn apart, that hundreds of thousands of people died, and that we then made a Herculean effort to reconstruct. But in 2017, people continue to die at the hands of people that still want to litigate the Civil War. And in 2017, Heather Heyer in Charlottesville was murdered and denied her life, and her family was denied, you know, the company of this beautiful woman, and she was killed simply because she was expressing an opinion about the appropriateness of having a statue in a park in her community. And she was killed by a terrorist over a statue, an inanimate object, a thing of metal and stone, over a thing. And you know, the images of Charlottesville and from the University of Virginia seem as though that they're from another time, and they're hard to compute. And I see men carrying torches and chanting and spewing hatred against Jews and minorities. We see Nazi and KKK flags waved through American streets. It waved in our parks here in San Antonio, and because of an inanimate object. And you know, there's people out there who want you to know that they hate you, and that they hate me, and they hate my beautiful children, and that they hate that there's people named Gonzalez and Saldana and Sandoval and Pelaez sitting on this dais. And you know, people gave up their lives to fight that kind of hatred, and we fought a world war. The planet went to war so that we would never have swastikas flying over parks. And Military City in large part exists to have guaranteed that we stamp out that kind of inhumanity. So I recognize that there's a lot of evil people out there who are cheering for the reaction that they're getting from us, which is fear. That said, I will tell you that there are a lot of very, very good, honest, conscientious people who are advocating to keep this statue. I've met them. I've spoken to you. I work with you. Some of your children play with my children. Some of you are friends of mine. We go to church together. To these people, this monument is not a symbol of hate. It's not a symbol of bigotry and white supremacy. To them, it's remembrance of their relatives who gave the ultimate sacrifice. To them, it's part of their rich history, and there's nothing wrong with observing history and remembering it. And you know, their objections are not lost on me. They're not unimportant. They're very legitimate, and they merit thoughtful consideration. And so, because this monument is a part of our very rich history, a very difficult history, we won't forget. And Mayor, the only reason that I'm going to support this today is because I've received a commitment from my fellow city council colleagues that this is not a statute we're just going to throw a tarp over and leave in a warehouse, but that I saw on this big screen and in today's agenda that what we're considering is moving it. It gets my support because of the relocation element to this ordinance, and that's why I support it. So long as we relocate it to a safe, respectful, and publicly accessible place, I'll support this, because I want my kids to learn from it. I want them to go see it one day, because they're going to be better citizens by being informed of the warts and the hairs, you know, on our history, sir. And we've got a beautiful museum in town where you can go learn about the World War II era, the Renaissance, you know, the Roman era. And I really would like to see one of our local museums be enhanced by you know, a robust Civil War era exhibit. And I think that a statue like this is an appropriate place there. I really don't think that placing a statue in a park is a suicide pact, that, you know, a street name or a school name is something there in perpetuity. Things change, monuments change, street names change, and it's okay for things to be in museums and be observed there. So with that, I do have questions of the city manager, if I may, Mayor. Manager, I wonder if we could get together and explore the possibility of figuring out how to not pay $150,000 to move an inanimate object across town. Number one, surely there's got to be some less expensive way of doing that. And two, if we're going to be moving this object to a museum, let's say, I've spoken to the authors of the Hotel and Occupancy Tax Statute, who indicate to me that it was written in such a way to where moving a piece of art or sculpture or a piece of history like this to a museum, so long as we demonstrate that there is a added benefit to the hotel industry, tourism industry, is permissible under the statute. Can I get your commitment that you and I will sit down and talk about ways that we might be able to creatively use HOT to fund the moving of this statute?
Mayor and Council, what we've recommended today is that this be funded through the general fund. That's the action before the Council. If you'd like to amend that motion to say that it would be funded by hotel occupancy taxes, that's the Council's prerogative to do that. But the recommendation today is to fund it through the general fund. Secondly, the contractor is an experienced contractor who has moved other monuments similar to this one, and this is the cost. It is a complicated move. The statue will be taken apart and taken to a secure location for storage until a final destination for it is decided.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Pelaez. Before I call the next council member, I forgot to mention I have received 2 pieces of written testimony that have been placed in the record. For the record, one is in favor and one is against the action today. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. A few years ago, we had an event at Travis Park for Ciclovia, and we were having like a health fair and a couple of activities there in the park. I'm born and raised in San Antonio. I have often gone to Travis Park. But I went with my son, who was pretty small at the time, and he started playing on the cannon. And of course, he doesn't know it's a cannon. He was quite small, and he was putting his face inside and yelling, and it was echoing. And I remember thinking, I wonder why they would put a cannon in a park. It's a sign of violence and war, and it seems sort of odd. But that was the end of it. And I didn't think much more about it until we started talking about this, and we started hearing about the violence all over the country and all that was going on and what that really symbolized. And it is a great fault, I think, of ours in this country, and I think very often here in San Antonio that we don't know our history. We haven't been taught it for a lot of reasons. And as an adult, I'm really learning about my Mexican-American culture and how it impacts me and how it has formed me, and what the symbols are in our city and how that can impact us on a daily basis once we really start to realize how it impacts us. And so when this item came up, I thought it very important that we take action. And as we're thinking about our 300-year celebration that we're starting next year, and how we hope that our city will last another 300 years, we know that there are parts in our history that we are not proud of. And while it's important that we acknowledge it, it's also not something that needs to be reminded every day and needs to be set in such a way that it's an affront to all of those who visit and all those who pass. Just like in other parts of the world, even though in the
in Germany, there's no statues because while it's an important part of their history, the Germans are not necessarily proud of all that happened during World War II. And so I think this is another example of a way that our city is compassionate. We've seen it many times throughout the day, but especially with this new council, and I commend our mayor for taking such swift action and our colleagues for taking action because it is something that is very controversial. We all knew that it would be. But we're ready for that. We're ready to make the changes for our city for today and for 300 years from now, that there are not families sitting in the park thinking, why are there symbols of war and anger and history that we're not proud of, still memorializing our parks? That symbol had been there for 100 and something years. And it's only taken today for us to take action. So I'm proud of us for doing that, and I'm proud to support the removal of the statue and look forward to whatever comes next from that. So, and only because we are in the discussion about where what might replace it or what may go there, I look forward to a discussion of all of our heroes and all of our history, and that it can be represented fairly as we look forward to the next 300 years of our city. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Courage.
Thank you. I had no choice of being born white or being born poor, but today I have a choice on how to vote. My decision to vote for removal and relocation of the Confederate Soldier Monument at Travis Park should not be interpreted as a slight or denigration to anyone here or anyone who's spoken or transmitted their opinions or concerns to me or my office over the last few weeks. I respect the honor and pride that people hold for their ancestry and their family. This action does not deny anyone the opportunity to continue to honor and celebrate their history. The passage of time always brings change, both physically and in our views and opinions of the past. The view and opinions of the purpose and the meaning of the monument to many, many of the residents of San Antonio have changed or evolved, just as our views and opinions about African Americans, Mexican Americans, GLBTQ Americans have changed and evolved. Today, considering the views and opinions of so many San Antonians, my vote looks to a different future for San Antonio, not our past. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Perry?
Yes, got a few questions here. First for Mr. Segovia. Have we confirmed that the city has the legal authority to remove the statue and donate it?
Councilman, yes, we're pretty confident that the city has the authority to remove the statue and relocate it. It's city property.
Okay. Confident but haven't confirmed?
Councilman, yes, confirm. We understand there is a legal challenge to that, but we're very, again, confident in our position.
Okay. Did we check to make sure that the Daughters of the Confederacy conferred that ownership to the city?
We're confident that they conferred ownership to the city. Now, what the mechanism for that is, I mean, there is no deed or anything. I mean, again, it was quite a few years ago. But we've had litigation that pretty clearly has established that the monument does belong to the city and that the park belongs to the city.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Miller. Is she here? Shannon Miller? Different Shannon Miller.
I'm standing in for Shannon today.
Okay, thank you. What's the normal process for a resident requesting to modify their home when located in a historic district? What's that process?
Right, they would go to the Office of Historic Preservation and they would ask for a certificate of appropriateness. So staff would review what it is they want to do, and they would issue that certificate if appropriate.
Okay. And if they requested it to demolish it or move it, how long would that process normally take?
If it was an administrative decision, they could approve it within a couple of days. If it required the HDRC to look at it, it could be about a couple of weeks to schedule that item.
Okay. Did the HDRC support the UDC waiver to remove the authority for this item?
We did not present this to the HDRC.
Okay. Okay, so it didn't go to the HDRC at all, to the members or the chairman?
Staff reached out to the various members of the commission. We did hear back from the chairman, who was supportive of waiving this requirement.
So the chairman was supportive?
He was supportive. He talked to Shannon today and said that to her.
Okay. Today?
It was today. She'd reached out to him earlier in the week, and they talked this morning.
Okay. And do you know if the chairman got in touch with any of the committee members?
I do not know if he did. Shannon and her staff did reach out to other members. The majority of them were supportive of the decision today.
Okay. How many members were supportive? And do you know?
I don't have a count. I do know that they reached out to several of them, and they were okay with the waiver.
Okay. Do we have that in writing or anything?
No, it was basically they phone called them. They called them, reached out to them, and it was a conversation between Shannon and her staff and those members.
So they reached out to them, but they didn't talk until today?
That was the chairman. There was other folks that they talked to earlier in the week. There may have been a few emails as well that have come back and forth.
All right. Thank you. Sir, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Councilman Trevino and Councilman Shaw for bringing this up for consideration. But I also want to say a few comments that in the original CCR, it asked for a full process. And we did not go through that full process. I know there's a sense of urgency because of the violence that was held or that happened in Charlottesville. And let me tell you what, we have no place here in San Antonio for hate, number one. But we can't do knee-jerk reactions. We have processes. I don't think, in fact, for us to apply for this UDC change, that was not right. We need to stick to the process to make sure that citizens can be heard through that process and also through the B session. I've heard from a lot of people in District 10. I can tell you the vast majority was for keeping the statue where it is. I've had a lot of suggestions with that about, hey, let's add statues to that park. Let's tell both sides of the story. And I particularly like the one about let's add another statue there of a Union soldier and have lest we forget on that statue as well. You know, I'm looking at this saying, should we be tearing down things or should we be building things to shed new light, shed new information on it, and information that we can talk about and dialogue across the whole spectrum. I mean, we've heard passionate pleas on both sides of the fence here. But this morning had a conversation with Councilman Pelias. He actually went to the statue last night, and he just kind of sat around listening. I did not do that. I was tired after that long session last night and went home. But he went out there and sat amongst the folks that were out there, and you had some for and some against. But you know what really came out of that visit? And he was surprised, and I was surprised to hear that also, that both sides actually were sitting down talking to each other. What a novel Fact. They were sitting down talking to each other. And you know what else? They both said, hey, I understand your position. I understand your position. So to me, that is very, very important. We in San Antonio can do that. We can sit down and talk across the table and talk with each other about what we should do or what we should not do. You know, rushing this without a public process, without that everybody being on the same page, it concerns me. It concerns me because the item was posted on our council agenda just on Monday. And this was a time when we had some horrible devastation down on the coast. Think of it. There's people still dying in Houston. That's where our focus should be today. Not talking about a statue. There's devastation. We're prepared for additional folks to come here to San Antonio, and that's where our focus should be, is helping our brothers and sisters down in Houston and on the coast. You know, we weren't provided this in our Council B session, where we could have talked about this and had dialogue. You know, our citizens to be heard opportunities where you come and talk to us. It's a one-way street where you just come and talk to us. We can't talk back to you because it's a citizens to be heard process. We can't discuss this back and forth to try to come up with compromises and talking about each other's positions and how we can come together on this. So we didn't allow for that, and we didn't allow for the HDRC process that each one of us on the council appoints members to. It's a community action organization to review processes and refute requests for historical type of structures, and this is one. This has been there for over 100 years. This didn't just happen overnight. I mean, this is something that could have come up to in the HDR process and start discussing that years ago. This didn't just happen overnight. So we did not put it through that process to get that review and approval. I mean, why do we even appoint citizens to these committees if we don't allow them to do their jobs and keep us in the loop on what they're coming up with and give us a time to review that and again have those public discussions at those committee meetings as well as our B sessions and not just a one-way discussion here at council. You know, why aren't we holding ourselves to that same standard as a normal private citizen wanting to relocate or even demolish a historic building? We're not doing that here. We're not doing that up front. And that's where we should have done that up front before we got to this place. You know, during the campaigns, there was a lot of promises about being open, being transparent. But yet we're still bypassing that process in order to get a rush decision. It concerns me because we're now setting up a pattern of the council taking up issues that alienate folks on both sides, forcing them to choose which side they're going to be on. And if they're not successful, then they're vilified by the other side. That is not right. That is not right, folks. We all have a say here. Everybody in here, there's passionate talks on both sides of the aisle here. We need to listen and discuss this. Okay, we're now removing, well, we've already set precedent that our public rights-of-way can be modified with private funding, and now we're removing that citizen-led checkpoint by restricting the power of the HDRC from reviewing a change in public property. I'm uncomfortable with all of this, with the precedents that these are putting out there and what the long-term effects are. Think about this, folks. What are the long-term effects that the city can make changes in our processes and make unilateral decisions out there? It's not just for this statute, it could be for other issues as well. I really support anything that brings our community together, and don't mistake my candor for a lack of empathy on what this monument means to the African community. African American community. Do not mistake that. I grew up in a segregated town, but you know what? When I went to college, I learned a lot. I went into the Air Force for 21 years, and yes, I worked for other, not just white people on the staff. I worked for minorities, and I learned tremendously. 21 years in the Air Force, and there was not room for white supremacy in the Air Force, and I certainly didn't exercise it, and I respected those that were in authority over me. Again, I support anything that brings our community together, and actually reading the Articles of Secession, it's really clear that the war was declared on the United States over states' rights to maintain slavery as an institution, and that war against the United States was lost. I know that, you know that, everybody in here knows that. So I can understand the reasons to remove this monument, but I do not understand, and I do not agree with circumventing all of our processes to do this without getting the right input to the city and helping me make a decision based on community input through the committees that we have established, and not having that two-way dialogue with you out there. I had that dialogue in District 10, and I can tell you again, the vast majority of folks were saying to keep it where it is, but there were a lot of good ideas, again, as I said, to add monuments to that park, make changes to the monument, and still give that opportunity to folks to memorialize their ancestry here in San Antonio. So I can say that way back when, over 100 years ago, when this monument was first thought about and put up there, that there probably was not a dialogue back then. You know, they didn't go around getting community input. Hey, should we put up this memorial here in Travis Park? They probably didn't do that. Guess what? We're doing the same thing today. Why do we want to replicate that mistake here in San Antonio? And yes, we will be judged. I'm not going to be around here in 100 years, but we'll be judged about what we're doing today and what impacts we're making for the rest of San Antonio and for the rest of the state and nation. Finally, I firmly believe that anything worth doing must be done right. And again, I support Councilman Trevino and Councilman Shaw's efforts and appreciate their CCRs requesting a full process to be in place at the beginning before we work through this issue, this statute. But right now, you know, as it stands, I can't vote for this thing, and I'd like to make a motion, sir. I move to delay this item to allow for the entire process, including the HDRC, to occur and for the City Council to receive a full briefing to vet all the details of this item in a B session. That's my motion.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Perry. There is a motion from Councilman Perry on the floor.
Second.
There is a second from Councilman Brockhouse. Move now to Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you, Mayor. Sort of like Councilman Belias, I had my statement, and then I had my other statement that I wrote, and now Councilman Perry has spoken, and I have other comments. I do believe this is different from any typical HDRC process that comes forward, and there are many of us here who have received. We've been inundated with correspondence, and some of that correspondence has been less than friendly. And some of it has been, it's been threatening. And I think the longer we continue this dialogue, the more we put ourselves at that risk. I do believe that we will have, and I support, a dialogue around the relocation of the statue as far as where it's going to go. But I think as long as we don't take this vote today, we do put council members at risk. But thank you for your comments, Councilman Perry. So I'm going to go back to my second statement. I know that I'm sorry, I want to thank the mayor for putting this on the agenda. I want to thank Councilman Trevino and Shaw for their work on this, as well as staff, Lori and John. You put something together very quickly, so thank you for your work on that, for helping us find a solution. Like I mentioned, I have received correspondence from my constituents in this regard on both sides of the issue. And I want them to know, because I hear that some of them watch this when it's live and some of them watch it on Sunday. So I want you to know, wherever you are, that I've read those comments and that I have considered those concerns. I know that for many of you, just like Rusty, who's here, that for many of you, this monument is a memorial that honors ancestors. And if anyone were proposing to destroy that monument and obliterate it from the face of San Antonio, that I would oppose that. I do believe it is part of our history and that we can't hide that. But I do support the original motion that Councilman Trevino made as it is, because it preserves that statue. This is a meaningful part of many people's history, of the city's history, and I respect that. But I can't ignore that to many other people in my district and outside of my district and even outside of the bounds of San Antonio, the statue doesn't represent an honor to their ancestors, that it's actually a painful reminder of the shackles of their ancestors. And I ask you for a moment to put yourselves in their shoes, just for one moment. Our country eventually recovered, and we rebuilt ourselves from the tragedy that was the Civil War. I don't think I can say with any confidence that we have fully recovered from the history of slavery in this country. This past week, with the events of the hurricane, our city has demonstrated how generous and how welcoming we are. We've opened our hearts. So to those of you in District 7 who are watching from home, from your computers or from work, I know you're not here on the dais with me, but I ask you to open your hearts and to vote with me today. I ask you to join me in this vote and to support the relocation of the statue to a place that's more appropriate for its context, and that takes this reminder, this painful reminder for some people off of that pedestal that it's on right now, and it puts it in an appropriate context. So thank you very much, Mayor. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval. Councilman Brockhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a little bit of a sequence issue here because I seconded Councilman Perry's motion to postpone this for many of the same reasons I agree with you, Councilman, on dialogue and discussion and education and the successes of what comes out of that conflict, right? And I thought you spoke very eloquently and very emphatically that you may have a contrarian or alternative view, but your heart's not in a negative place. I think we have to, no matter what, respect that that is the case. And I just wanted to thank you for at least welcoming that debate, because the fact of the matter is we have citizens coming down. Last night's a perfect example, offering their feedback and ideas, and the process is already done. 9 council members are on the record. The mayor put out a statement that morning saying it was coming down. Cranes are ready, apparently. Police officers' security plans are in place. But welcome, Mr. Citizen, to the dais. Please speak to us in a one-way conversation. But we've already decided this is a done deal. At least the dialogue would have offered an educational opportunity of a back and forth. And so that's why I seconded your motion, and I'm going to push forward on that. But I'm not like, as apt on this one to go off script, so unlike Councilman Pelias, I'm going to follow the notes because I've got a lot of, and contrary to what, this is a personal thing as me as a council member, right? How I do business, the things I find. So if anything, I walk away from this, even if it's only for 2 years, I try to speak from the heart wherever possible. And so to do that, I'm going to have to read this because this was not a simple or easy decision for me. This took a lot for me to be to where I'm at on this point today. So first off, I want to discuss the importance of following the process. Process protects people and their voice. We did not follow the normal process for removing and relocating a statue or a monument. We did not follow the process laid out by Councilmembers Shaw and Trevino CCR, which thank you for that. I think you outlined that perfectly, what you were expecting. We're not following that process. Instead, we're here today to ignore the process and ignore our own laws, the Unified Development Code, which we're going to bypass and ignore to take down the statue and cannons and stick them into storage. Now, that communication I was speaking of with the public is something that we all ran on to get these chairs, to get here to this moment for each one of us, that communication. There have been opportunities for the public to address City Council, at citizens to be heard, but have we really heard a true dialogue on this issue? I would argue that we have not. In fact, citizens to be heard, to Councilman Perry's point, is a one-way conversation, citizen to council. There's not a dialogue there, there's not a debate. It's a one-way conversation. And throughout all the commentary, there was so much, and I kept learning throughout the whole process because there's a lot of historical inaccuracy and a lot of revisionist history. I mean, there was multiple times proponents of taking down the statue came up here and said it was William Travis, that the statue was of William Travis. I mean, there was a lot of historical inaccuracies. And on the other side, coming up here and saying that slavery was not part of the Confederacy, I could have fallen out of my chair at that moment. I mean, it doesn't make absolutely no sense that someone would come up here and argue that. So throughout all the public commentary, I'm listening and thinking there's historical inaccuracy all through this. Hence why the Historic Design and Review Commission could have been a benefit to this process to clarify the history and the things that stood behind these monuments. So at the very least, that communication, educated dialogue would have been helpful, and that's what I'm arguing for on that point. So transparency is also very important. The item was placed on the agenda on the last possible day for legal posting. The final location of the statue and cannons are still unknown. We're being asked to store these items in an undisclosed location. We have no breakout of what this funding or financing is for. That's not transparency. That's our council voting on minimal information, and that's bad business and an example of poor leadership. So, Mayor Nirenberg, you posted that our community is in the process of having difficult but important conversations about our collective history. We are committed to remembering the past, replacing oppression with justice, and building equity where there was once segregation. And you went on to say, these are not easy conversations, but I'm confident that the residents can come together in a way that honors American free speech traditions. I look forward to continuing to engage the residents. You campaign for a city that we deserve, and you stated clearly, but nowhere is the health of a community more clearly understood than in the engagement of its citizens in the governance process. And I wholeheartedly agree with you on that point. But where are the actions behind those words? When we don't follow the process, when we don't hold a true dialogue and communicate, transparency suffers. So the process in this case was clear. It was a choice not to follow it. And I would argue that caused a lot more dissension and uncertainty. And then the timing of this vote as well. I think we have to take a step back and realize that the timing issues of what's going on in our state and on our coastal bend, we could have waited. The reality of the situation is there are two options available for this issue to follow. The first is the process that you're asking to modify or waive a clearly stated UDC, and the second is Councilmember Trevino's and Shaw CCR. We're ignoring both. We watched last 2 nights ago when NEISD changed the name of Robert E. Lee High School. Statues of Christopher Columbus and Abraham Lincoln are being vandalized and desecrated across the country. And I have to ask, because this is what my citizens, the residents that I serve, are asking me, when does it end? That is a fair question. When does it end? Many have said, come up here and spoke on this dais and said that this is just the beginning, that there are multiple more opportunities and statues and images that need to come down. And with that, we should have a process in place to handle and address those. Because it could be anything. It could be Thomas Jefferson High School in District 7. Thomas Jefferson, slave owner. You don't have to go too far in to understand Sally Hemings and hiding that for decades. T.C. Frost, we do multi-million-dollar deals with Frost Bank. Colonel T.C. Frost was a colonel in the Confederate Army. So where is a good Confederate and a bad Confederate? If this dais up here is cutting deals with Frost Bank and moving multi-million-dollar contracts, and there's a plaque on this building, where do we draw the line, right? Where is at the end actually the end? So I would argue we don't own the sins of our ancestors. The sins of our past shouldn't be our cross that we bear today. What we own are the decisions we make right now. That's what's most important to me. What we own are the choices and responsibilities. This is City Council to build a better future for all of our residents, and that's what I'm attempting to do for the people that I represent. Now that's Greg Brockhouse classic process talk. Now I'm going to have to speak to you from my heart. This was a tough call, not because of a statue, but because of the many good citizens that came down and tried to engage the process to be heard. A lot of District 6 residents have reached out and shared their feelings with me on this vote. Throughout it all, not a one has said anything to me that would have been construed as racist or attacking or demeaning, to Councilman Perry's point. They're good people who spoke from their hearts, and that should be recognized for what it is, even though we disagree. During much of the citizen comments, it was sad to see, good people being demeaned for their honest beliefs, right or wrong. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned that respect is a two-way street, and if we are to move past issues, we have to forgive and strive to see the best in each other. And that was demonstrated this morning. We should attempt to see the best in each other, not always think the worst. So as for monuments, all I can tell you is this. I'm not a black man living in America. I'm not. I don't understand what it means to walk by that statue or Confederate battle flag, and I never will. I simply won't. And frankly, through all the public comments, I truthfully listened most when a black man or woman stood at the microphone and told me how they really felt. And why would you say, would that I pay more attention there? It's because they're living it right now. That's it. Many cared and came forward and stood for their cause, whether you're white, whether a Frenchman was up here arguing, it seemed to me, had a French accent. I don't know if he was from France or what, but he was arguing for it, right? It was great to see people from all walks of life stand up for a friend, but only a few could say with certainty and truth on how they really felt about historical oppression. I took some time in this to talk to my colleague, Cruz Shaw, and I asked him a question, how he honestly felt about the monument and what it stood for. And he spoke to me from his heart, and it spoke to mine. He said that he worried about the children he may have. And he used the word may very specifically to me in the future, and how they would live in our city, in our community, because of the color of their skin. That monument, the Confederacy, was a reminder of that to Cruz. And he told me that. There was also a lady, I don't know if my colleagues remember, she stood up here. She was a young black woman or adopted two white parents. Her name was Miss Evangelista, of all things, and it stuck with me. It really did. And if you look up what Evangelista means, it means the evangelist or the messenger. And she sent a message to me. So she came down here to speak to us, adoptive daughter, white parents, and was as nervous as I'd ever seen anyone speak at the podium. But as she spoke in a loud and clear heart, she said that the monument hurt her, and no matter how much her loving white parents cared, they would never understand the pain and struggle of her life. And for me, it pretty much ended right there. If we're ever to get past the division of our world, let alone our city, we have to look outside ourselves and dare to care for the life of a fellow citizen without prejudice, without fear of exposure, without the worry of repercussion. That's the conflict right there, and that's the challenge. Putting yourself on a limb, out on that limb, to care more about another than you do yourself. And with that challenge in mind, I'm going to vote yes on removing the monument. Because if it's ever going to happen, if we ever get past the division, it has to start with me. And it has to start with you. This is a gesture to say I'm willing to sacrifice my personal belief for the greater good of our community, for my friend Cruz, my colleague, and for Miss Evangelista, who stuck with me throughout the last few weeks. So it's not a blanket bandwagon vote that will apply in perpetuity to any statue or monument that comes my way. I will take each case individually. But at some point, this will have to end. But to get there, it has to start somewhere. And I am willing to go out on that limb and make it happen with my vote today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Brockhouse. Councilman Saldana.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Councilman Trevino and Councilman Shaw. If anybody has been bearing the brunt of what a difficult conversation can do to an elected official, it's bring forth the wrath of people who disagree with you. So thank you for staying true and helping us get to this point. And let me, just so folks know, I'm the third to the last one. We're going to get to the vote, so I don't want to be too verbose. I think a lot of what has been said has already covered a lot of what I believe about this issue. This is not a very difficult one for me. I won't bury the lead. I want to support the removal of the statue, plain and simple. And let me not make a judgment on the hearts of those who are on either side of this debate. I can't judge your heart about where you are on this issue and how you feel or how you look at that monument, but I will make a judgment on our times. We live in interesting times, and we live in times where the difference from what I see in the chamber when I look in the audience and the difference between what I hear from those citizens who are coming to use their voice is much different than the time that existed when this monument came up. There are folks in this council chamber who perhaps in 1899 were not allowed to be within the councils of government, not the least of which be their voice. There are people who are in this council chamber today who perhaps, if sounding the same alarms and using the same messages and using the same language that they used when they spoke to us today, might have been met with the type of violence that none of us would ever know because we live in 2017. To peacefully protest in 1899 the erection of the statue would have meant much different consequences to the folks in the black community. It would have meant much different consequence to those in the Latino community if they had voiced up. It perhaps even would have made a difference to a contrarian woman who at that point didn't have the right to vote, didn't have a voice in a council of government. So I will not make a judgment on people who have come up here and said that they want to see the monument stay, but as I was saying, as I've stated, I will make a judgment on our times. And it has been 3 years that we have at least heard the discussion of this issue. In my mind, in my opinion, probably 3 years too long. I want to commend and give credit where credit is due because there are voices and people who are in the chamber today who were lining up at that statue as early as 2014, trying as hard as they could to raise the voice of their community and get the attention of the folks who stand up here or sit up here. And it took us longer than it should have to get to this point. We're thinking about what it means to be in elected office, and I think as we think about the judgment of our times, it is a statement that the folks who are sitting up on the dais are different than the faces you would have seen in 1899. So what I'm arguing is that there was an absence of debate because of government-sanctioned racism and government-sanctioned discrimination built into the laws that would not allow a pure, equal debate. And some folks might say that removing a statue is not going to do anything to progress a movement towards equality or towards justice. But just as it was not easy to integrate a lunch counter, it was necessary. Just like it was not easy to integrate our schools, it was necessary. And while they didn't solve problems within divisions between blacks, whites, or other groups in this country, they were necessary movements, and they proved a point that if you, in peaceful protest, in loud protest, in fist-raising protest, decide to use your voice to be part of this democracy, that it is equal on balance to anyone else's voices, and that has not always been true in our country, and it was not true when this statue was put up. So if in my mind, this statue could have stayed up for 1,000 years, as long as existence would have allowed, if it had gone on a private property or if it had gone on a property that was not a public park. That gives a certain endorsement from government that we've moved away from. We do not endorse these symbols that too often are meant to prop up one voice over another. So let me give credit again to the folks who have been consistent in coming, not just yesterday, but for the last 3 years, who were at the monument asking the city council to act. It took us 3 years, but we're here now. And this is a necessary statement. This is a necessary action in my mind. It's much harder to guarantee equal justice, but this is a statement that shouldn't be difficult for us, and I'm glad that we're going to finally make it here today. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Saldana. Councilman Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Like many of my colleagues, I have a script, and they know better because I'm not going to read it. Also, those who know me, I try to make light of a lot of situations. Intense situations, my coping mechanism is to make people laugh and kind of calm down that environment. But that's not going to be the episode this time. And I'm going to shock a few of you all, and if I do, I shock you. But imagine being a 10-year-old walking to school. A truck pulls up with a Confederate flag. 4 white individuals jump out of that truck, call you a nigger, punch in the face, and drive off, laughing. Imagine that, a 10-year-old. You go to school, you tell them. No history teacher comes and says, well, it's not about race. No historian comes and says, well, it's not because you're black. It's because they're just bad people. Then going home to a Hispanic mother who never understood about being black in this country, never understood about being a man in this country, but holding that 10-year-old. That's tough. And then imagine in 2017, during this whole process, get emails that says, nigger, if you vote for this, we'll get you. There's no reason for a process. There's no reason for a dialogue. I'm not putting any of my appointees through that. I'll take that. We'll take that together. I commend the mayor for putting this on the fast track. I will not allow anybody else out in this community, in this dais, to take the amount of threats that we've received in the last month and a half. And it wasn't about history. It wasn't about preserving our heritage. It was about getting emails called a nigger time and time again. And for many of you, you can't put it into words because that's never happened. You can't grasp that concept. But to me, I lived it. I'm only 40 years old. So it wasn't like it was a civil rights era. This is 10, 20 years ago. And I'm very blessed, I'm very fortunate to have gone through what I've gone through. The United States Navy, law school, opened my own practice. But there's individuals out there today that are still trying to remind me every day, you're still that nigger. So it's not about history. Now, if it would have been any other flag that jumped out that truck and punched me in my face, we'd have a problem with that symbol too. But that symbol, you never saw anybody from the Daughters of the Confederacy, you never saw anybody who's pro-history come out and say, no, it's not about that. They were very quiet. And in situations like this, when you're quiet, you accept it. And that's a problem. And the easiest way to control somebody is not through chains or jails. It's in their minds. So when you have young people walking in front of symbols that brings back that memory, their parents, their grandparents, things we've gone through. Black, Latinos, Asians, women, the LGBTQ community, we all have experienced something that says this is not right. And that symbol that means to oppress, regardless of the culture, regardless of the historical, the content, it's there to oppress. Indirectly, we're oppressing our children and our children's children. It's burned into our mentality. And that's the way I view this. And I'm glad my colleague, Councilman Brockhouse, because he asked me about this. And my wife and I, we had a good discussion because we're both mixed. And we decided we don't want to have children in this environment. We don't know how it would feel to come home one day and we're told that, oh, our child was beat up because of the color of their skin. Or my child was shot because he was walking down the street and somebody was scared of him. Can't imagine that. And this has nothing to do political. My decision to move forward with Councilman Trevino is not about politics. It's about doing the right thing. It's about doing the right thing for San Antonio. We deserve better. This is a great community. That's why we all live here. We chose to serve here. We deserve more. Let's put away the icons of oppression. Let's put away the icons of somebody being superior to others. Let's put away the icons and symbols that suggest that I am better than you because of your skin, because of your gender, because of your sexual preference. We're setting the tone right here in San Antonio. And I'm blessed to be here with this dais. But let's keep in mind, though, the fight's not over. It's an ongoing battle. Some do it in the streets, some do it in the courtrooms, some do it in the schools. But we all have to work together to ensure that our children and our grandchildren have a better society to live in. You know, I can't explain to you the amount of prayers that came in for us and the amount of support, especially last night, to see the young people come out and, busloads in support, being civically engaged in this decision. It does not stop now. It must continue. Because usually what we tend to see is the opposition is always the loudest. Not this time. The people that were in favor, they came out and they spoke in favor. And I applaud every last one of you. For those that want the statue to remain, I applaud you. I wish Mr. Wells was here. I wish Ms. Langhart was here. Because we sat down and had a conversation. And they were for it. They were against removing the statue. But like adults, we sat down, we didn't bring any guns, we didn't bring any helmets, any bulletproof vests. We sat down like Americans, we sat down like adults and had a conversation. At the end of the day, I understand the perspective. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And that made me a better person with that conversation. So of course, I'm going to support this motion. But once again, the fight does not stop after this vote. We have to ensure that our kids receive much more than what we received. So, Mayor, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for pushing this agenda item. Councilman Trevino, thank you for your support. We've had late night conversations about the emails and about what's the next move. But thank you for my colleagues who are supporting this motion, and God bless us all.
Thank you, Councilman Shaw. Councilwoman Villagran.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Shaw, for telling your story. And thank you, Councilman Trevino, for putting this forward, and Mayor, for the expeditious nature of this. I'm going to make this very quick, because I want to also thank everyone who's been here because you have sat through hours of testimony, but you're also a part of the process. And this is our America, and this is our democracy. The story of America, we must tell her whole story, but it's a complicated story that requires nuance and context, which a statue alone cannot provide. Councilman Shaw, I believe that this moment we are changing the narrative. And I would posit that our heritage, our culture, is not static like a statue. It is what we saw, we are seeing in San Antonio. San Antonians coming together to volunteer, to give blood, to serve, to smile, to help one another. And being your neighbor is what our culture, and that is our heritage, living and active. As I shared in my inauguration speech, I believe we need to eradicate institutional systems of racism and sexism that exist in the city. And moving the Confederate statue into a museum can only serve as a way to put this part of our history in its proper environment and context. And we have to make sure we do not normalize an ideology of hatred. And I will cast my vote in support of this movement in honor of my grandfather, who was lynched by the Texas Rangers. It's a story that we need to change. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Villagran, and we do have a motion and a second on a secondary motion. Then we'll take up the main motion. But that is the extent of our conversation today. And I do have a few comments I do want to make, mainly because I know my son is probably watching. I want to start off by thanking all of those who have made their voices heard. The civic engagement of our constituents is a key in making us better public servants in any issue. Your participation has fostered real conversations, as we have noted over the last 3 years, as to who we are as a city. We know where this most recent movement began. 2 years ago, after the horrific murders of churchgoers during a peaceful service in South Carolina, this nation was forced to confront a difficult reality. A reality that many people have lived with, but collectively we had been unwilling to confront. That the divisions of race and class and communities have not healed. Rather, they have only been covered up. Now, we have an opportunity to move forward and help close that chapter in San Antonio. With the removal of the Confederate statue, we are asserting that this monument, a monument to a war to defend the indefensible, located in the middle of a public park, is no longer acceptable. I stand in support, and I congratulate and am inspired by my colleagues, Councilman Shaw and Councilman Trevino, who initiated the action that has resulted in today's vote. I want to be clear that while we worked with deliberate speed, we listened to residents from every corner of San Antonio through public forums like this one, through social media, through letters, meetings, and phone calls, and things you don't even want to hear. There are those that say that removing a monument to the Confederacy is erasing history. Others say removing a century-old statue will do nothing to erase the scars of slavery or racism, and that it is naive to suggest otherwise. I reject those notions. This monument glorifies a lost cause that this city fundamentally rejects today, just as it did in 1861. Hundreds of San Antonians, this is history, cast their votes against the Articles of Secession and chose to reject the Confederacy, to stay a member of a more perfect union. Today, we have the opportunity to move forward. I ask you, can we not honor those who died without glorifying their cause? In a modern city like ours? Yes, we can. The march to social justice is taken one step at a time, and it's taken here in San Antonio. It's taken by people like Dolores Huerta, like Cesar Chavez, like Jaime Martinez, like Emma Temeyuka. It's taken even today by people that you have seen on this dais when we fight back against unconstitutional laws that would target immigrant communities, or we say it's not okay to discriminate in this city based on sexual identity or sexual preference or race or color or veteran status. It would be a monumental miscalculation to underestimate the moment that we are in today, the opportunity we have as a city, as a country, to write our next chapter of our story. The Travis Park Monument is historical, and part of that history will be the choice that this council makes. Today, we write a new chapter in our history and in the history of this monument by removing it from Travis Park Public Square. It is a moment of our history on the cusp of our second 300 years, for which our next generation can be proud when they read about it. As has often been noted, even in these chambers by people sitting right here, obligation will threaten that if I don't act, I will be in trouble. But responsibility will say that if I don't act, they will be in trouble. No, it may not be your job or obligation to see these matters gripped with urgency, but it is your responsibility. When I made the decision to run for mayor of San Antonio, I did so with the future in mind to make this city one of equity and one of decency. It may not be our obligation, but I see it as our responsibility to act for future generations. And for those who would question process, there are times when a mayor must act not out of politics, but out of the concern for safety and also for doing the right thing. I cannot, in good conscience, advocate for the future of our city if we support pillars of our past that glorify its darkest chapters. People shrink, some may shrink from some tough decisions, but leaders rise to the occasion, and San Antonians elected this council to lead. And so now it's the time to act. And recognizing the good work of our Councilman Shaw and Councilman Trevino and the motions they have placed on the table, I do want to move on with this vote. So, in order of process, we will take up the secondary motion to delay made by Councilman Perry and seconded by Councilman Brockhouse. All those in favor of a delay, please vote. Motion fails. Now we'll take up the motion on approval of item 5 made by Councilman Trevino and seconded by Councilman Shaw. Please vote. Motion carries. Thank you all for coming out. That is the balance of our agenda. I believe there's a city manager's report. No city manager's report. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.